In this module, I'd like to talk a little bit about Cisco platform considerations. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm assuming that you're a first-time user of GNS3, and as such, you need to be aware that in order to use this application, this software, at minimum, you're going to need to download two pieces of software. You're going to have to download the GNS3 software itself, which actually comes bundled with a whole bunch of other stuff, which is kind of neat. And then you're also going to have to download at least one Cisco iOS software image, possibly more depending on what you need to do. So the order that you do that in is really up to you. Doesn't matter to me whether you download the GNS3 software first or the Cisco iOS. But I'm just going to start with the assumption that the first thing on your mind is which Cisco iOS software image is appropriate for what I want to do with GNS3. So let's talk a little bit about that. Because GNS3's main job is to emulate Cisco hardware, in other words, you're using real Cisco iOS software within the GNS3 application, but you don't have a chassis, you don't have anything physical that you can feel and touch, and yet that software needs to believe that it's running within a real Cisco router, and that's the real power of GNS3. That's exactly what it does. It creates these virtual routers running real software. But because of that, if you know anything about Cisco, you know that Cisco has hundreds and hundreds of makes and models of routers and switches, and there's no way that GNS3 could emulate all of them. So for that reason, GNS3 only emulates or simulates certain router platforms. So you need to know that, because there would be nothing more frustrating than if you went through all the process of getting a hold of and downloading a Cisco iOS image, and one of three things happening. Either the iOS image you download is not supported by GNS3 at all, and then you'd have to contend with all the error messages and things that you're seeing, or possibly it is supported by GNS3, but it's buggy, has all sorts of problems, and maybe leads to all sorts of errors. Or the third scenario is the software you download runs just great within GNS3, but because it's not the platform that you really needed, it doesn't support the features that you want. For example, what if you're doing a lab on ATM, asynchronous transfer mode, and you download software for a router that doesn't support ATM? It doesn't even have in the real world any modules or adapters or interfaces that support ATM. Well, now your GNS3 supports that software, but you can't configure ATM because the software you selected doesn't run that feature. So let's first of all let's just focus for the moment in this video on how do we figure out what Cisco iOS software is supported by the GNS3 platform and works the best on that. So to do that, I'd recommend that you go to the GNS3 website, as you can see right here, gns3.com. And if you haven't already done so, make sure that you go to the sign up button right here, and you're going to want to create a username and password, basically register on their website. So once you click on that, you'll just type in your email address and then whatever password you want. And then at that point, you'll have the ability to download the software and participate in the community if you ever have any questions, or if you just want to look up some of the questions that other people have asked. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's log in. And depending on your network speed and everything else, it might take a certain amount of time. So now we're logged in. Here it comes, coming back up. Great. Okay. So at this point, once you're logged in, now remember, the question we're trying to ask is what Cisco iOS software images are supported by GNS3? So to answer that question, we're going to want to go right here and click on where it says support. So go ahead and click on support, and then from here, we're going to go to documentation. Now there's multiple ways to get this question answered. This is just one way that I've discovered. So once we click on documentation, so here within the Getting Started section, what we want to look at is adding iOS images. That's where we're going to go to. Click on that link. Now, this whole document, if you read through it, is actually about once you have your Cisco iOS software image, how do you get it loaded into GNS3? How do you get GNS3 to recognize it so it can create a virtual router out of that software? But we're not even at that point yet. Right now, we just have to figure out what software is compatible with GNS3. So to answer that question, right here in this sentence, right there, it says Cisco iOS image listed in this document. That is actually a link. So if you go ahead and click on the words there in this document, that will take you to another document that actually displays the various Cisco iOS images that are supported by GNS3. You can see here it supports the 1700 series images, the 2600 series, 3620s, on and on and on, all the way down to, at the very bottom here, is the 7200 series. A couple of things to point out about this. Now, number one, as I do this recording, it's currently mid-February of 2016, so keep that in mind. So as of right now, when I'm doing this recording, if you want to practice features that are only found in the 15 train, like 15.1M or something of iOS, the only software currently that GNS3 supports for that is the 7200 series. Okay, so if you select any of the other platforms, you'll have to use 12.3 or 12.4 or something like that. Now, if you are preparing for your CCNA or even your CCNP, chances are you won't necessarily need some of the newer bells and whistles that are in the 15 train of Cisco iOS. 12.4 should be more than sufficient for you for whatever you need to do. So you can choose from any of these platforms right here, and those should get you working. Now, let's say that you're pursuing your Cisco CCNA, and you're watching this video and you're saying, but Keith, I don't know anything about the differences between Cisco routers. I've got a login for Cisco. I can get a hold of Cisco iOS images for pretty much any router, but which one should I choose? There's about 7 or 8 routers in this list here. Which one should I pick, since I don't really know the differences between one router and another? Well, what I would recommend in that particular case, if we go up here, I would suggest that you get a hold of software images that support either the 3725 series of router or the 3745 series of router. If you can get a hold of those would be the best. Why is that? Well, a little bit later in this video series, I'm going to talk about switching in the world of GNS3 and how you accomplish switching. And if you get a software image for one of these 3700 series of routers, that comes along with it a switching module. Nothing else you have to download, nothing you have to do, but basically you can turn on a switch that operates within or inside of that router, and now you can do switching and routing. Most of the other platforms don't support that switching module. So if you don't know anything about Cisco routers at all, and you're just looking for advice on which particular one to choose for your iOS image, I would select a 3725 or a 3745 image. So with that, we'll conclude this particular video. In the next 1 or 2 videos after this, I'll just show you 1 or 2 other things you want to think about selecting a Cisco iOS image. In other words, we'll look at memory considerations. How much memory does each software image use, because it's going to use memory in your laptop when you run GNS3. And secondly, we want to think about, well, various different software images support different features. There's Cisco's IP services, which is different than Cisco's advanced enterprise feature sets. And you want to make sure that when you're downloading software, it runs the features that you need for your topology. We'll talk about that in the next upcoming videos.